Question 1. Strategic planning requires an internal auditor to thoroughly assess the effectiveness of a medical device manufacturer's processes for managing adverse events and implementing field safety corrective actions. During an audit, the auditor discovers that while all reported adverse events are documented, there have been instances where the assessment of reportability to regulatory authorities was delayed by several weeks, and the decision to initiate a field safety corrective action for a recurring issue was postponed pending further internal investigation, even though the potential for harm was identified. The auditor also notes that the verification of FSCA effectiveness in the field is primarily based on self-reported data from the sales team. Which of the following approaches best reflects the internal auditor's responsibility in this situation? Adhering strictly to the principles of ISO 13485-2016 and the regulatory framework for medical devices. Option A. Conclude that the process is adequate as all events are documented and FSCA are eventually implemented, and suggest minor procedural updates to improve efficiency without impacting current operations. Option B. Report the delays in reportability assessments and FSCA initiation as minor deviations, suggesting that the company's internal investigation process for FSCA is sufficient as long as it leads to a corrective action eventually. Option C. Recommend a review of the adverse event reporting and FSCA procedures to ensure timely assessment and decision-making, and propose independent verification methods for FSCA effectiveness, emphasizing the need to meet regulatory timelines and mitigate patient risk. Option D. Focus on the documentation of reported events and the completion of FSCA, advising the company to prioritize addressing any immediate patient harm, rather than focusing on potential future risks or minor delays. The correct answer is C. Recommend a review of the adverse event reporting and FSCA procedures to ensure timely assessment and decision-making, and propose independent verification methods for FSCA effectiveness, emphasizing the need to meet regulatory timelines and mitigate patient risk. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a critical post-market surveillance activity where timely and accurate reporting of adverse events and the subsequent initiation of field safety corrective actions, FSCA, are paramount to patient safety and regulatory compliance. The internal auditor is tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of processes designed to detect, assess, and report these events, which directly impacts the company's ability to mitigate risks and maintain market access. The challenge lies in discerning whether the observed deviations represent minor procedural oversights or significant systemic failures that could lead to regulatory noncompliance, patient harm, and reputational damage. The auditor must balance the need for thoroughness with the urgency required in handling potential safety issues. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based evaluation of the entire adverse event reporting and FSCA process. This includes verifying that all reported events have been appropriately assessed for reportability, that timelines for reporting to regulatory authorities have been met, and that the decision-making process for initiating FSCA is robust and documented. It also entails confirming that the implemented FSCA are effective in addressing the identified risks, and that their implementation is adequately monitored and verified. This approach aligns with the principles of ISO 13485-2016, specifically clauses related to post-market surveillance e.g. 8.2.1822 complaint handling 8.2.1 and the establishment of a feedback system 8.2.1 that feeds into risk management 7.1. It demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing patient safety, regulatory adherence, and the continuous improvement of the QMS. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the documentation of reported events without verifying the accuracy of the assessment or the timeliness of regulatory submissions. This fails to address the core purpose of adverse event reporting, which is to protect public health. It represents a regulatory failure by potentially overlooking reportable events or delaying necessary notification, thereby violating the spirit and letter of regulatory requirements for vigilance. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss minor delays in initiating FSCA as insignificant, especially if no immediate patient harm has been reported. This is a critical ethical and regulatory failure. ISO 13485-2016 and associated regulations mandate prompt action to address identified risks. Minimizing delays, even without immediate reported harm, can lead to prolonged exposure of patients to potential hazards and constitutes a failure to adequately manage risk and fulfill post-market obligations. A third incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the quality department's internal assessment of the process without independently verifying the effectiveness of the FSCA in the field. This overlooks the crucial aspect of verifying that the corrective actions have actually resolved the issue and prevented recurrence. It represents a systemic failure in the audit process, as it does not provide assurance that the QMS is effectively achieving its intended outcomes in practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to internal audits, focusing on areas with the highest potential impact on patient safety and regulatory compliance. When evaluating adverse event reporting in FSCA, auditors must 1. Understand the relevant regulatory requirements for the jurisdictions in which the medical devices are marketed. 2. Review the documented procedures for complaint handling, adverse event reporting, and FSCA management. 3. Select a representative sample of reported events in FSCA for detailed examination. 4. Verify the accuracy and completeness of event assessments, reportability decisions, and regulatory submissions. 5. Assess the timeliness of reporting and the effectiveness of implemented FSCA. 6. Identify any deviations from procedures or regulatory requirements and evaluate their potential impact. 7. Report findings clearly and concisely, providing actionable recommendations for improvement. 8. Follow up on the implementation and effectiveness of corrective actions. This systematic process ensures that the audit provides valuable insights into the QMS's performance and contributes to the ongoing safety and effectiveness of medical devices. Question 2. Governance review demonstrates that during a recent internal audit of the Medical Device QMS against ISO 13485-2016, the auditor observed that a critical design document, essential for product release, was not listed in the current approved document master list. The auditor also noted that the document's revision history indicated it had been updated by the design team last week, but the updated version had not yet been formally approved or distributed according to the established document control procedure. The auditor is unsure how to proceed with this finding. Option A. The auditor should seek clarification from the design team and document control personnel to understand the reason for the discrepancy, review the process for document approval and distribution, and assess if any product was released using the unapproved document before formally documenting the finding. Option B. The auditor should immediately classify this as a major nonconformity and report it to senior management, as the absence of an approved document on the master list and its unapproved status violates fundamental document control requirements. Option C. The auditor should document the observation as a minor finding, assuming it is a temporary oversight that will be rectified by the design team before the audit concludes. Option D. The auditor should bypass the document control department and directly instruct the design team to immediately approve and publish the document to the master list to rectify the situation. The correct answer is B. The auditor should immediately classify this as a major nonconformity and report it to senior management, as the absence of an approved document on the master list and its unapproved status violates fundamental document control requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where an internal auditor, tasked with assessing compliance with ISO 13485-2016, discovers a discrepancy in document control that could have significant implications for product safety and regulatory adherence. The challenge lies in balancing the auditor's duty to report findings accurately and objectively with the potential for disruption, and the need to understand the root cause before making definitive conclusions. The auditor must navigate the ethical imperative of transparency and compliance against the practicalities of an ongoing process and the potential for misinterpretation of incomplete information. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to understand the context and impact of the observed document control issue. This aligns with ISO 13485-2016, specifically Clause 4. 2. 3. Control of documents and Clause 4. 2. 4. Control of records, which mandate that documents and records are controlled. The auditor's responsibility is to verify that these controls are effective. By seeking clarification from the responsible personnel and reviewing the associated records, the auditor ensures that the finding is accurate, complete, and understood in its proper context. This approach upholds the integrity of the audit process and provides a basis for constructive feedback and corrective action, rather than premature judgment. It reflects best professional practice by prioritizing factual accuracy and a comprehensive understanding of the QMS. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately escalating the issue as a major nonconformity without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge that document control processes can be dynamic, and that a temporary or minor deviation might not constitute a major nonconformity. It bypasses the opportunity to understand the reasons for the discrepancy, potentially leading to an inaccurate assessment and unnecessary alarm. This approach violates the principle of objective evidence required for audit findings and can damage trust within the organization. Another incorrect approach is to overlook the discrepancy, assuming it is a minor oversight that will be corrected. This is a failure to adhere to the auditor's responsibility to identify and report nonconformities, regardless of perceived severity. ISO 13485, 2016 requires effective control of documents and records. Ignoring a deviation, even if seemingly small, means the audit has not fulfilled its purpose of verifying compliance. This can lead to systemic issues going unaddressed, potentially impacting product quality and patient safety. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty. A third incorrect approach is to directly instruct the responsible personnel on how to rectify the situation without fully understanding the existing procedures or the nature of the discrepancy. While well-intentioned, this oversteps the auditor's role, which is to assess compliance, not to manage the QMS. It can undermine the authority of the process owners and may lead to solutions that are not sustainable or compliant with the established QMS. This approach can also lead to the auditor making assumptions that are incorrect, further compromising the audit's objectivity. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. When a potential nonconformity is identified, the first step is to gather sufficient objective evidence. This involves understanding the context, consulting relevant procedures, and speaking with the individuals responsible for the process. The auditor should then evaluate the evidence against the requirements of the standard, ISO 13485, 2016, and the organization's own documented procedures. If a nonconformity is confirmed, its significance and impact should be assessed to determine its classification e.g. minor, major. Communication with the auditee is crucial throughout this process to ensure clarity and to facilitate the development of effective corrective actions. Question 3. Compliance review shows that a new medical device is scheduled for release, but the engineering department has not yet finalized the risk management file, as required by ISO 14971. The project manager is pressuring the internal auditor to approve the release, stating that the product is low risk, and the risk management documentation can be completed after market launch to avoid delays. What is the most appropriate action for the internal auditor to take? Option A. Approve the product release with a commitment from the engineering department to complete the risk management file within 30 days post-release. Option B. Recommend a simplified risk management process for this product, given its perceived low risk, to expedite the release. Option C. Insist on the completion and documented approval of the risk management file, including risk analysis and evaluation, before approving the product release. Option D. Accept the product release based on verbal assurances from the engineering team that all significant risks have been considered and mitigated. The correct answer is C. Insist on the completion and documented approval of the risk management file, including risk analysis and evaluation, before approving the product release. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a conflict between the perceived urgency of product release and the rigorous requirements of risk management as mandated by ISO 13485-2016 and ISO 14971. The internal auditor is tasked with upholding the integrity of the quality management system, QMS, by ensuring that risk management activities are not merely a procedural hurdle, but a fundamental component of product safety. The pressure to expedite market entry can lead to a temptation to overlook or downplay identified risks, creating an ethical dilemma for the auditor who must balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and patient safety. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach is to insist on the completion and documented approval of the risk management file, including the risk analysis and evaluation, before the product can be released. This aligns directly with the principles of ISO 13485-2016, specifically Clause 7.1 Planning of product realization, and Clause 7.1.5 Control of monitoring and measuring equipment, which implicitly requires that any controls or processes used in product realization, including risk management, are validated and effective. More directly, ISO 14971-2019, Application of Risk Management to Medical Devices, mandates a systematic process for risk management throughout the product lifecycle. Clause 5, Risk Analysis, Clause 6, Risk Evaluation, and Clause 7, Risk Control, all require documented evidence of these activities. The auditor's role is to verify that these requirements have been met. Failing to do so would be a direct contravention of the QMS and the applicable standard, potentially leading to unsafe products reaching the market. This approach upholds the ethical responsibility to prioritize patient safety and regulatory compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to accept the product release with a promise to complete the risk management file post-release. This is a significant regulatory failure, as it bypasses the critical risk assessment and control measures that are intended to be in place before a medical device is made available to users. It violates the proactive nature of risk management required by ISO 14971 and the QMS principles of ISO 13485. Ethically, it prioritizes speed over safety. Another incorrect approach is to approve the release based on verbal assurances from the engineering team that risks have been considered. This is a failure to adhere to the documented evidence requirements of ISO 13485, Clause 4.2. 2 Quality Manual, Clause 4.2. 3 Control of Documents, and Clause 4.2. 4 Control of Records, and ISO 14971. Risk management must be a documented process, and verbal assurances are not acceptable evidence of compliance. This approach also demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and due diligence. A third incorrect approach is to suggest that the risk management process can be simplified due to the product's perceived low risk. While the level of risk may vary, the process of risk management, as defined by ISO 14971, remains mandatory for all medical devices. Simplifying the process without a documented justification based on a thorough risk analysis would be a failure to follow the standard. This approach undermines the systematic and comprehensive nature of risk management. Professional reasoning. When faced with such a situation, a professional internal auditor should follow a structured decision-making process. 1. Understand the requirements. Clearly identify the specific clauses of ISO 13485-2016 and ISO 14971-2019 that pertain to risk management and product release. 2. Gather evidence. Review existing documentation, including the risk management plan, risk analysis, risk evaluation, and risk control measures. 3. Assess compliance. Compare the gathered evidence against the requirements of the standards. 4. Communicate findings. Clearly articulate any nonconformities to the relevant stakeholders, explaining the implications for patient safety and regulatory compliance. 5. Recommend corrective actions. Propose specific actions to address the identified nonconformities, such as completing the risk management file and obtaining necessary approvals. 6. Escalate if necessary. If there is resistance or a failure to address the nonconformities, follow the organization's escalation procedures to ensure the integrity of the QMS is maintained. The auditor's primary responsibility is to the QMS and patient safety, not to expediting product release at the expense of compliance. Question 4. Investigation of the effectiveness of design and development output controls within a medical device manufacturer's QMS, audited against ISO 13485-2016, requires an auditor to assess how documented outputs are verified. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates an understanding of the standard's requirements for design and development outputs? Option A. Confirming that design and development outputs are documented, and then focusing the audit on the subsequent stages of the product lifecycle, assuming the outputs are inherently correct. Option B, verifying the existence of a documented procedure for controlling design and development outputs, and then accepting that all outputs generated under this procedure are compliant and effective. Option C, examining every single design and development output document generated within the audit period to ensure each one is present and correctly filed according to the QMS documentation control requirements. Option D, reviewing a sample of design and development outputs to confirm they are documented, and then comparing these documented outputs against the established design input requirements and defined acceptance criteria to ensure their adequacy and suitability for subsequent processes. The correct answer is D, reviewing a sample of design and development outputs to confirm they are documented, and then comparing these documented outputs against the established design input requirements and defined acceptance criteria to ensure their adequacy and suitability for subsequent processes. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in internal audits of medical device quality management systems, QMS, under ISO 13485-2016. The challenge lies in discerning the appropriate level of detail and focus when evaluating the effectiveness of a QMS element, specifically the documentation and control of design and development outputs. Auditors must balance the need to verify compliance with the standards requirements against the practical realities of a functioning QMS. Overly broad or overly narrow interpretations can lead to inaccurate assessments of compliance and effectiveness. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core requirements of ISO 13485-2016, Clause 7. 3, which mandates that design and development outputs must be documented and meet the input requirements, be adequate for subsequent processes, and contain or reference acceptance criteria. This approach involves a comparative analysis of documented outputs against defined inputs and established acceptance criteria, ensuring that the outputs are not only recorded, but are also fit for purpose and verifiable. This aligns with the standard's emphasis on ensuring that medical devices are designed to meet user needs and intended uses, and that the QMS facilitates this. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the existence of documented outputs without verifying their adequacy against inputs and acceptance criteria fails to assess the effectiveness of the design process. This is a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the critical step of ensuring outputs are suitable for their intended purpose and meet the specified requirements, a cornerstone of medical device safety and performance. Ethically, it risks overlooking potential design flaws that could impact patient safety. Another incorrect approach that delves into the minutiae of every single design document without a risk-based or process-oriented perspective can lead to inefficiency and a lack of focus on significant risks or nonconformities. While thoroughness is important, an audit must be strategic. This approach can be seen as a failure to apply professional judgment and a potential misallocation of audit resources, which indirectly impacts the effectiveness of the QMS oversight. A third incorrect approach that assumes all documented outputs are inherently correct because they exist within the QMS fails to acknowledge the auditor's role in independent verification. This is a significant regulatory failure, as it abdicates the responsibility to challenge and confirm the validity of QMS elements. It also represents an ethical lapse by not upholding the integrity of the audit process and potentially allowing non-compliant or ineffective processes to persist. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific ISO 13485-2016 clause and its intent. 2. Identifying the key requirements and expected evidence. 3. Developing a risk-based audit plan that prioritizes areas of higher potential impact. 4. Selecting appropriate audit techniques, such as comparative analysis, to gather evidence. 5. Evaluating the evidence against the standards requirements and the organization's own procedures. 6. Forming an objective conclusion on the effectiveness and compliance of the QMS. Question 5. What factors determine the appropriateness and effectiveness of risk assessment techniques, such as FME and FTA, when auditing a medical device QMS against ISO 13485-2016? Option A. The frequency with which risk assessments are performed and the seniority of the personnel conducting them, without direct verification of their impact on device safety. Option B, the general industry best practices for risk assessment and the level of detail in the risk management plan, irrespective of the specific device. Option C, the availability of detailed FME and FTA templates and the number of risk control measures identified in the documentation. Option D, the specific risks associated with the medical device, its intended use, and the integration of the risk assessment outputs into the overall QMS for ongoing risk management. The correct answer is D, the specific risks associated with the medical device, its intended use, and the integration of the risk assessment outputs into the overall QMS for ongoing risk management. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an internal auditor tasked with evaluating the effectiveness of risk assessment techniques within a medical device quality management system, QMS, governed by ISO 13485-2016. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial review of documented procedures to a deep understanding of how these techniques are practically applied, their limitations, and their alignment with regulatory expectations for ensuring medical device safety and performance. The auditor must critically assess whether the chosen risk assessment methods, FME, FTA, are appropriate for the specific risks associated with the device, adequately implemented, and contribute meaningfully to risk management throughout the product lifecycle. This requires not just technical knowledge of the tools, but also an understanding of their integration into the broader QMS and their impact on decision-making. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on evaluating the suitability and effectiveness of the chosen risk assessment techniques, FME, FTA, in relation to the specific medical device and its intended use, and how these techniques are integrated into the QMS for ongoing risk management. This aligns with ISO 13485-2016 Clause 7, 1. Planning of product realization, and Clause 8, 2. 1. Verification, which mandate that risk management activities are integrated throughout the product lifecycle. Best practice dictates that the auditor assesses whether the selected techniques are capable of identifying potential hazards, estimating the associated risks, and evaluating the effectiveness of controls. This includes examining the scope of the FME/FTA, the competence of the personnel performing them, the rigor of the analysis, and how the outputs are used to inform design, manufacturing, and post-market surveillance. The focus is on the practical application and the resulting impact on device safety and compliance, which is the core objective of a medical device QMS. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the existence of documented FME and FTA procedures without verifying their actual implementation and effectiveness. This fails to meet the audit objective of assessing the QMS's ability to ensure device safety and performance. ISO 13485-2016 requires that processes are not just documented, but are effectively implemented and maintained. A failure to verify practical application is a significant regulatory and ethical lapse, as it could lead to undetected risks. Another incorrect approach would be to assess the FME and FTA based on generic industry standards or best practices, without considering the specific risks inherent to the medical device in question. While general knowledge is important, ISO 13485-2016 emphasizes a risk-based approach tailored to the specific product. Overlooking device-specific risks means the risk assessment may be incomplete, potentially leaving critical hazards unaddressed, which is a direct contravention of the QMS's purpose. A third incorrect approach would be to treat FME and FTA as isolated activities, disconnected from other QMS processes such as design controls, complaint handling, or post-market surveillance. ISO 13485-2016 mandates a holistic, integrated approach to risk management. If the outputs of risk assessments are not fed back into design improvements, corrective actions, or updates to risk management files, the QMS is not functioning as intended, and this represents a failure to comply with the spirit and letter of the standard. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by first understanding the specific medical device, its intended use, and the regulatory landscape applicable to it. Then, they should review the documented risk management procedures, paying close attention to the chosen techniques, FME, FTA. The critical step is to then conduct substantive audit testing to verify the practical application of these techniques. This involves interviewing personnel, reviewing risk assessment records, and tracing how the outputs of these assessments have influenced design decisions, manufacturing processes, and post-market activities. The auditor must critically evaluate whether the chosen techniques are appropriate for the identified risks, and if the analysis is sufficiently thorough. Decision-making should be guided by the principle of ensuring patient safety and product efficacy, as mandated by ISO 13485-2016. Any deviation from a thorough, device-specific, and integrated risk assessment process should be identified as a nonconformity. Question 6. When evaluating the implementation of the quality policy for a medical device manufacturer adhering to ISO 13485-2016, which approach best demonstrates that the policy is effectively established, communicated, and understood throughout the organization, influencing daily operations and decision-making? Option A. The quality policy was drafted by the quality manager based on generic templates found online, with minimal input from other departments, and is primarily used as a document to satisfy external auditors. Option B. The quality policy was developed by top management, approved, and then posted on the company intranet with a one-time announcement during employee onboarding. Option C. The quality policy was developed through a collaborative effort involving representatives from R&D, manufacturing, quality assurance, and regulatory affairs, ensuring its relevance to all operational areas. It is regularly discussed in departmental meetings, integrated into training programs, and referenced in internal audit findings and management reviews to demonstrate its impact on decision-making and continual improvement. Option D. The quality policy was developed by top management and communicated through a company-wide email, with the expectation that employees will understand and adhere to its principles without further reinforcement or integration into operational processes. Correct answer is B. The quality policy was developed by top management, approved, and then posted on the company intranet with a one-time announcement during employee onboarding. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, under ISO 13485-2016. The difficulty lies in ensuring that the quality policy, a foundational document, is not merely a static statement but a living, breathing part of the organization's culture and daily operations. The challenge is to move beyond a perfunctory approval and communication process to one that demonstrably influences decision-making and employee behavior at all levels. This requires careful consideration of how the policy is developed, understood, and integrated into the practical realities of medical device manufacturing and quality assurance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves actively engaging relevant stakeholders in the development and review of the quality policy, ensuring it is clearly communicated and understood by all personnel, and demonstrating its integration into daily activities and decision-making. This aligns with ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5.3, which mandates that the quality policy be relevant to the purpose of the organization, include a commitment to meet requirements and to continually improve the effectiveness of the QMS, and be a framework for establishing and reviewing quality objectives. Active engagement ensures the policy is practical and achievable, while clear communication and demonstrated integration ensure it is understood and acted upon. Fostering a culture of quality is essential for medical device safety and efficacy. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to consider the quality policy solely as a management-level document that requires only top management approval and minimal dissemination. This fails to meet the spirit and intent of ISO 13485-2016, which requires the policy to be communicated and understood within the organization. A policy not understood by all personnel, particularly those directly involved in product realization, cannot effectively guide their actions or contribute to the continual improvement of the QMS. Another incorrect approach is to develop the quality policy in isolation, without considering the operational realities and specific risks associated with the organization's medical devices. This can lead to a policy that is aspirational but impractical, or one that does not adequately address the commitment to meet regulatory requirements and improve QMS effectiveness as mandated by the standard. A policy developed without input from those who implement it daily is less likely to be embraced or effectively applied. A third incorrect approach is to treat the communication of the quality policy as a one-time event, such as during initial onboarding, without ongoing reinforcement or integration into performance reviews and decision-making processes. ISO 13485, 2016 implies a dynamic and ongoing commitment. A policy that is not regularly reinforced or visibly applied in practice will likely become irrelevant to employees, undermining its purpose as a framework for quality objectives and continual improvement. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach the quality policy development and communication by first understanding the organization's specific context, including its products, processes, and regulatory environment. They should then facilitate a collaborative process involving key personnel from different departments to develop a policy that is relevant, actionable, and reflects a genuine commitment to quality and compliance. Communication should be multifaceted and ongoing, utilizing various channels to ensure understanding and integration into daily work. Regular review and reinforcement of the policy's relevance and application are crucial to maintaining its effectiveness as a cornerstone of the QMS. Question 7. Strategic planning requires a clear and accurate understanding of key terminology. During an internal audit of a medical device manufacturer's QMS, an auditor encounters a situation where the auditee's documentation and personnel consistently use the term risk assessment interchangeably with risk management. The auditor needs to determine the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with ISO 13485, 2016. Which of the following best reflects the auditor's professional responsibility and best practice in this scenario? Option A. The auditor should focus on the frequency with which the terms are used, as a high frequency suggests the auditee is actively engaged with risk-related concepts, which is a positive indicator. Option B. The auditor should accept the auditee's usage as a valid interpretation, as long as the overall outcomes of their risk-related activities appear satisfactory during the audit. Option C. The auditor should identify this as a significant nonconformity, as ISO 13485-2016 clearly distinguishes between risk management, a comprehensive process, and risk assessment, a component activity within that process. And this misapplication indicates a potential systemic failure in understanding and implementing risk-based approaches required by the standard. Option D. The auditor should note the auditee's terminology preference and suggest they maintain consistency in their internal documentation, as the core intent of managing potential hazards is likely being met. The correct answer is C. The auditor should identify this as a significant nonconformity, as ISO 13485, 2016 clearly distinguishes between risk management, a comprehensive process, and risk assessment, a component activity within that process. And this misapplication indicates a potential systemic failure in understanding and implementing risk-based approaches required by the standard. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an internal auditor to critically evaluate the understanding and application of fundamental ISO 13485, 2016 terminology within the quality management system, QMS. Misinterpreting or misapplying these definitions can lead to significant compliance gaps, ineffective audits, and ultimately compromise the safety and efficacy of medical devices. The auditor must move beyond superficial recognition of terms to a deep understanding of their practical implications in the context of a medical device QMS. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by focusing on the auditor's ability to discern the accurate definition and application of a core ISO 13485-2016 term. This aligns with the fundamental requirement of an internal audit to verify that the QMS is implemented and maintained effectively according to the standard. Specifically, understanding the distinction between risk management and risk assessment is crucial. ISO 13485, 2016 Clause 7, 1. Planning of product realization, and Clause 8, 2. 1. Feedback, implicitly and explicitly require a systematic approach to managing risks throughout the product lifecycle. The correct approach shows the auditor can identify when a fundamental definition is being misused, indicating a potential systemic issue in the QMS's understanding of risk. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach that focuses on the auditor's personal opinion or a general understanding of quality principles without grounding it in the specific definitions within ISO 13485-2016, represents a regulatory failure. It suggests a lack of diligence in applying the standard's requirements. For instance, if an auditor accepts a definition that conflates risk management, a broad, ongoing process, with risk assessment, a specific activity within risk management, they are failing to uphold the integrity of the audit and the QMS. This could lead to an inadequate identification and mitigation of device risks, a direct contravention of ISO 13485-2016, emphasis on risk-based approaches. Another incorrect approach might be to focus on the asterisk frequency asterisk of a term's use rather than its asterisk correct definition and application asterisk, which is an irrelevant metric for audit effectiveness and compliance. This indicates a superficial understanding of audit objectives. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first thoroughly understanding the definitions provided within ISO 13485-2016 itself, particularly in the introductory sections and relevant clauses. When evaluating an auditee's understanding, the auditor must compare their stated definitions and practical applications against the standard's explicit requirements. If ambiguity exists, the auditor should consult authoritative interpretations or seek clarification from subject matter experts, but the primary reference must always be the standard. The decision-making process involves 1. Identifying the term in question. 2. Locating its definition and context within ISO 13485-2016. 3. Assessing the auditee's understanding and application against this standard. 4. Documenting any discrepancies and their potential impact on QMS effectiveness and regulatory compliance. Question 8. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a new, comprehensive quality management software system to track all quality objectives would be a significant investment. However, the internal audit has highlighted a need to improve the process for establishing and achieving quality objectives, with a particular focus on ensuring they are measurable and aligned with the organization's strategic direction. Which of the following actions best addresses this audit finding in accordance with ISO 13485-2016 requirements? Option A. Acknowledge the audit finding and schedule a dedicated workshop in 6 months to brainstorm potential quality objectives for the following year. Option B. Integrate the definition and review of quality objectives into the organization's strategic planning process, ensuring they are measurable, documented, and assigned to relevant functions with clear plans for achievement, and then evaluate the need for supporting software. Option C. Immediately procure and implement a new quality management software system, assigning the quality manager to configure it to track all potential quality objectives. Option D. Delegate the responsibility for defining and achieving all quality objectives to the Quality Assurance Department, providing them with a budget for any necessary training or tools. The correct answer is B. Integrate the definition and review of quality objectives into the organization's strategic planning process, ensuring they are measurable, documented, and assigned to relevant functions with clear plans for achievement, and then evaluate the need for supporting software. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, balancing the desire for improvement with resource constraints. The internal audit has identified a need to enhance the process for defining and achieving quality objectives, a critical element of ISO 13485-2016. The challenge lies in determining the most effective and compliant way to address this finding, considering that the proposed solutions have varying levels of resource commitment and potential impact. A hasty or incomplete response could lead to noncompliance with ISO 13485-2016, potentially impacting product safety and regulatory standing. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented process that directly addresses the audit finding by integrating quality objectives into the strategic planning of the organization. This aligns with ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5. 4.1, which mandates that top management shall establish quality objectives at relevant functions and levels within the organization. It also implicitly supports Clause 4.1, which requires the organization to establish, document, implement and maintain a quality management system, and continually improve its effectiveness in accordance with the requirements of ISO 13485-2016. By focusing on the integration of quality objectives into the strategic planning process, the organization demonstrates a commitment to embedding quality into its core operations, ensuring that objectives are not merely aspirational, but are actionable and resourced. This approach ensures that the planning to achieve these objectives is also considered, as required by Clause 5.4.1, which states that these objectives shall be measurable and consistent with the quality policy. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply acknowledge the audit finding and defer the development of specific quality objectives to a future, undefined date. This fails to meet the requirement of establishing quality objectives at relevant functions and levels, as mandated by ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5.4.1. It also neglects the implicit requirement for ongoing improvement and proactive management of the QMS. Another incorrect approach would be to implement a new, complex software system for tracking quality objectives without first defining the objectives themselves, or ensuring that the proposed system aligns with the organization's strategic goals and resource capabilities. This is a reactive and potentially wasteful approach that does not address the root cause of the audit finding and may not be effective in achieving meaningful improvements. It also risks creating a system that is not utilized or is misaligned with the organization's actual needs, failing to demonstrate effective planning to achieve objectives. A third incorrect approach would be to assign responsibility for defining and achieving quality objectives solely to the quality department, without involving other relevant functions or top management. ISO 13485-2016, Clause 5.5.1 emphasizes management responsibility for the QMS, and Clause 5.4.1 explicitly states that top management shall establish quality objectives. This siloed approach fails to foster a company-wide commitment to quality and may lead to objectives that are not integrated with the overall business strategy or adequately supported by other departments. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such audit findings by first understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485-2016 related to quality objectives and planning. They should then conduct a thorough assessment of the current state, identifying gaps in the establishment, communication, and achievement of objectives. The decision-making process should prioritize solutions that demonstrate a commitment to integrating quality objectives into the organization's strategic planning and operational processes, ensuring measurability, consistency with the quality policy, and resource allocation. This involves collaboration across departments and clear communication from top management. The focus should always be on demonstrating compliance with the standard and fostering a culture of continuous improvement. Question 9. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of production line personnel in a medical device manufacturing facility are unable to articulate the primary quality objective related to reducing product defects by 15% in the current fiscal year. During an internal audit, the auditor observes that while the quality policy is displayed, the specific, measurable quality objective is not prominently communicated in the production areas, and training materials do not explicitly link daily tasks to this objective. The auditor needs to determine the most appropriate course of action to address this finding in accordance with ISO 13485-2016 requirements. Option A. Advise the quality manager to ensure the quality objective is included in the next revision of the company's quality manual, assuming this will suffice for communication purposes. Option B. Immediately escalate the issue to the executive management team, highlighting the potential for increased defect rates and regulatory noncompliance, without further investigation into the root cause. Option C. Document the finding as a minor nonconformity and suggest that the quality objective be simplified or removed if it is proving too difficult for personnel to grasp. Option D. Recommend a comprehensive review of the communication strategy for quality objectives, including methods for cascading specific objectives to all relevant personnel, developing targeted training, and establishing feedback mechanisms to ensure understanding and engagement. The correct answer is D. Recommend a comprehensive review of the communication strategy for quality objectives, including methods for cascading specific objectives to all relevant personnel, developing targeted training, and establishing feedback mechanisms to ensure understanding and engagement. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an internal auditor to navigate a situation where a critical quality objective, essential for regulatory compliance and patient safety, is not being effectively communicated or understood across the organization. The auditor must balance the need to identify and report nonconformities with the potential impact on employee morale and the practicalities of implementing corrective actions. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that the communication of quality objectives is not merely a procedural step, but a living part of the organization's culture, directly influencing daily operations and decision-making. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the root cause of the communication breakdown and aligns with the intent of ISO 13485-2016, specifically Clause 5, 3 Quality Policy, and Clause 5, 4, 1 Quality Objectives. Effective communication of quality objectives ensures that all personnel understand their role in achieving these objectives, which are fundamental to the QMS and the quality of medical devices. This approach fosters a proactive quality culture, enabling the organization to identify and mitigate risks before they lead to nonconformities or adverse events. It also supports the establishment of measurable quality objectives and their subsequent monitoring, as required by Clause 5. 4. 1. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on documenting the lack of communication without proposing actionable improvements fails to fulfill the auditor's role in driving positive change and ensuring the effectiveness of the QMS. This approach might satisfy a superficial audit checklist, but does not contribute to the organization's ability to meet its quality commitments or regulatory obligations. It neglects the principle of continuous improvement inherent in ISO 13485. Another incorrect approach that involves immediately escalating the issue to senior management without first attempting to understand the reasons for the communication gap or exploring potential solutions at a departmental level is premature and potentially damaging to interdepartmental relationships. While senior management oversight is crucial, a more collaborative and phased approach is often more effective in addressing systemic issues. This bypasses the opportunity for the relevant departments to take ownership of the problem and its resolution, potentially leading to resentment and a lack of buy-in for subsequent actions. A further incorrect approach that involves suggesting the quality objective be revised or simplified to make it easier to communicate, without first understanding why the current objective is not being understood, is a form of avoidance. This approach risks diluting the strategic intent of the quality objective and may not address the underlying communication or training deficiencies. It prioritizes perceived ease of communication over the actual achievement of critical quality goals, which could have implications for device safety and efficacy. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Thoroughly understanding the quality objective and its importance to the QMS and product safety. 2. Investigating the current communication channels and methods used to disseminate quality objectives. 3. Identifying the barriers to effective communication and understanding at various organizational levels. 4. Collaborating with relevant stakeholders to develop and implement practical, sustainable solutions for improving communication and comprehension. 5. Documenting findings and recommendations clearly, focusing on the impact on the QMS effectiveness and regulatory compliance. 6. Following up to ensure that implemented actions are effective in achieving the desired communication and understanding. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals a potential bottleneck in the design verification process due to insufficient specialized software licenses for the engineering team. As an internal auditor, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure compliance with ISO 13485-2016 requirements for determining and providing resources? Option A. Document the finding as a minor observation and recommend that management address the resource issue during the next budget cycle without further immediate investigation into its impact. Option B. Advise management to temporarily halt design verification activities until additional software licenses can be procured, regardless of the impact on project timelines. Option C. Suggest that the engineering team utilize alternative, less specialized software or manual methods to complete verification tasks, even if these methods are not as robust or validated. Option D. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to determine the extent to which the resource deficiency affects design verification activities, product realization, and overall QMS effectiveness, and recommend appropriate resource allocation based on this assessment. The correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed impact assessment to determine the extent to which the resource deficiency affects design verification activities, product realization, and overall QMS effectiveness, and recommend appropriate resource allocation based on this assessment. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential bottleneck in the design verification process due to insufficient specialized software licenses for the engineering team. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the organization's ability to meet regulatory requirements for design validation and verification, which are critical for medical device safety and effectiveness. The internal auditor must assess whether the current resource allocation aligns with ISO 13485-2016 requirements for determining and providing necessary resources, specifically Clause 6.1 Infrastructure and 6.2 Work Environment and Contamination Control, which implicitly includes the tools and systems needed for QMS operations. The auditor's judgment is crucial in balancing operational efficiency with regulatory compliance and patient safety. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment of the identified resource gap on the QMS and product realization processes. This means evaluating how the lack of sufficient software licenses could compromise the integrity, completeness, and timeliness of design verification activities. It requires understanding the specific verification activities affected, the potential consequences of delays or incomplete verification, e.g., non-conforming product, regulatory noncompliance, patient risk, and the cost-benefit of acquiring additional licenses versus alternative solutions. This approach represents best professional practice because it is proactive, risk-based, and directly addresses the root cause of the potential noncompliance. It aligns with ISO 13485-2016 emphasis on a process approach and risk management throughout the QMS, ensuring that resources are adequate to achieve conformity of the medical device and the QMS. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the finding solely based on the current budget constraints without a proper impact assessment. This is a regulatory failure because it neglects the organization's responsibility under ISO 13485-2016 to provide and maintain the infrastructure necessary for the QMS and product realization. Ethically, it prioritizes cost savings over potentially compromising product safety and regulatory compliance. Another incorrect approach is to recommend a workaround that bypasses or inadequately substitutes the required verification steps. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure, as it directly undermines the integrity of the verification process, potentially leading to the release of non-conforming devices and posing risks to patients. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the critical role of verification in ensuring device safety and effectiveness. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the regulatory requirement, ISO 13485-2016 clauses related to resources and verification. 2. Identifying the specific gap or issue in sufficient software licenses. 3. Conducting a risk-based impact assessment to determine the potential consequences of the gap on product safety, QMS effectiveness, and regulatory compliance. 4. Evaluating potential solutions, considering their effectiveness, feasibility, and cost. 5. Recommending a course of action that ensures compliance with ISO 13485-2016 and mitigates identified risks, prioritizing patient safety and product quality. Question 11. Comparative studies suggest that optimizing internal audit processes for medical device quality management systems, QMS, under ISO 13485-2016 requires a nuanced understanding of interested parties. Which of the following internal audit approaches best reflects this understanding and supports process optimization by proactively identifying and integrating the needs and expectations of relevant interested parties? Option A. The internal auditor conducts a broad review of industry best practices and competitor QMS documentation to infer potential interested party needs, without direct engagement with identified parties. Option B. The internal auditor exclusively reviews contractual agreements with customers to identify their stated requirements, assuming all other relevant needs are implicitly covered. Option C. The internal auditor prioritizes understanding the needs and expectations of the sales and marketing departments, as their input is crucial for market competitiveness, and then verifies that the QMS supports their objectives. Option D. The internal auditor focuses on identifying and documenting the explicit requirements of regulatory bodies, customers, and end users, and then assesses the QMS's adherence to these documented requirements through process reviews and evidence collection. The correct answer is D. The internal auditor focuses on identifying and documenting the explicit requirements of regulatory bodies, customers, and end users, and then assesses the QMS's adherence to these documented requirements through process reviews and evidence collection. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an internal auditor to move beyond a superficial understanding of interested parties to a proactive and strategic approach to identifying their needs and expectations. The challenge lies in discerning which needs are critical for regulatory compliance and QMS effectiveness versus those that are merely desirable or external to the core medical device lifecycle. Misinterpreting or overlooking key interested party requirements can lead to nonconformities, regulatory scrutiny, and ultimately, compromised patient safety. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the intent of ISO 13485, 2016, specifically Clause 4.1.1, which mandates the determination of interested parties relevant to the QMS and their requirements. This approach demonstrates a deep understanding of the QMS's context and its impact on stakeholders. By actively engaging with regulatory bodies, customers, and end users, the auditor ensures that the QMS is designed to meet not only explicit regulatory mandates, but also the implicit expectations that contribute to product quality and market acceptance. This proactive identification and integration of requirements are fundamental to process optimization, as it informs the design, development, and ongoing monitoring of processes to ensure they consistently deliver compliant and effective medical devices. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach that focuses solely on documented customer feedback without considering regulatory bodies or internal stakeholders fails to capture the full spectrum of relevant interested parties, as required by ISO 13485-2016. Regulatory bodies are critical interested parties whose requirements are non-negotiable for market access and compliance. Ignoring them represents a significant regulatory failure. An approach that prioritizes the needs of the sales and marketing departments over those of regulatory affairs and end users is ethically problematic and a regulatory failure. While sales and marketing are interested parties, their needs should not supersede the fundamental requirements for product safety, efficacy, and regulatory compliance, which are paramount in the medical device industry. This approach risks optimizing for commercial gain at the expense of patient well-being and regulatory adherence. An approach that only considers the explicit requirements stated in contracts, without seeking to understand the underlying needs and expectations of other relevant parties like regulatory agencies or healthcare professionals, is insufficient. ISO 13485, 2016 requires a broader understanding of interested parties and their requirements, which may not always be fully articulated in contractual terms. This can lead to a QMS that is technically compliant, but fails to meet the broader expectations for product performance and usability, potentially leading to market issues and regulatory concerns. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and comprehensive approach to identifying interested parties. This involves 1. Understanding the QMS scope and context as per ISO 13485, 2016 Clause 4.1. 2. Brainstorming all potential interested parties, including regulatory bodies, customers, distributors, end users, patients, suppliers, employees, and shareholders. 3. Determining which of these parties are relevant to the QMS and the medical device lifecycle. 4. Identifying the specific requirements of each relevant interested party, distinguishing between explicit and implicit needs. 5. Evaluating the impact of these requirements on the QMS and the organization's ability to consistently provide safe and effective medical devices. 6. Integrating these identified requirements into the QMS processes and ensuring they are communicated and understood throughout the organization. 7. Regularly reviewing and updating the understanding of interested parties and their requirements as the regulatory landscape and market evolve. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood of regulatory changes impacting product development timelines, and customer feedback indicates a growing demand for enhanced data security features. During an internal audit of the QMS, what is the most effective approach to assess the organization's understanding and integration of its context, as required by ISO 13485-2016 Clauses 4, 1 and 4? 2. Option A. Verifying that a formal procedure exists for identifying external and internal issues and interested parties, and that this procedure has been followed. Option B. Examining the minutes of management review meetings to ensure that external and internal issues and interested parties' needs are mentioned. Option C. Confirming that a risk assessment has been conducted for potential regulatory changes and data security concerns, and that the identified risks are documented. Option D. Reviewing documented evidence of how the identified regulatory changes and customer feedback have been analyzed and incorporated into the QMS scope, risk management processes, and product development plans. Correct answer is D. Reviewing documented evidence of how the identified regulatory changes and customer feedback have been analyzed and incorporated into the QMS scope, risk management processes, and product development plans. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems. Aligning the organization's strategic direction and external/internal issues with the practical implementation of ISO 13485-2016 requirements, specifically concerning the context of the organization. The professional challenge lies in ensuring that the internal audit effectively assesses whether the organization has truly understood and integrated its context into its QMS, rather than merely documenting it. This requires auditors to go beyond superficial checks and evaluate the impact of identified issues and interested parties on the QMS design, implementation, and effectiveness. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core intent of ISO 13485-2016 Clause 4. 1. Understanding the organization and its context. This clause mandates that the organization determine external and internal issues relevant to its purpose and strategic direction that affect its ability to achieve the intended results of its QMS. An audit that focuses on how these identified issues and interested parties' requirements have influenced the scope, processes, and risk management of the QMS demonstrates a thorough understanding and application of the standard. It ensures that the QMS is not a standalone system, but is integrated with the organization's operational realities and strategic goals, leading to a more robust and effective QMS. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the existence of documented procedures for identifying context, without assessing their actual impact or integration, fails to meet the standard's requirements. This is a regulatory failure because it bypasses the requirement to *use* the understanding of context to establish, implement, maintain, and continually improve the QMS. Ethically, it represents a superficial compliance effort that could mask underlying systemic weaknesses, potentially impacting patient safety and product quality. Another incorrect approach, which prioritizes the identification of interested parties, but neglects to evaluate their specific requirements and how they are addressed by the QMS, is also a regulatory failure. ISO 13485-2016 Clause 4. 2. Understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties requires determining these requirements and ensuring they are considered in the QMS. Failing to assess this integration means the QMS may not be meeting critical stakeholder needs, such as those of regulatory bodies, customers, or patients. A third incorrect approach, which limits the audit to verifying that a risk assessment is performed without linking it to the identified context and interested parties, is a significant regulatory failure. While risk management is crucial, Clause 7. 1. 2. ISO 13485-2016 emphasizes that risk management should be applied throughout the QMS, informed by the organization's context and interested parties' needs. An audit that treats risk management in isolation misses the interconnectedness required by the standard. potentially leading to risks being overlooked or misprioritized, because they were not viewed through the lens of the organization's specific circumstances and stakeholder expectations. A professional reasoning process for this situation should involve 1. Understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485, 2016 clauses 4, 1 and 4. 2. Analyzing the audit objective to assess the effective integration of the organization's context into its QMS. 3. Evaluating each audit activity against these requirements, looking for evidence of impact and integration, not just documentation. 4. Considering the potential consequences of a QMS that is not aligned with the organization's context and interested parties' needs, particularly in the medical device industry where patient safety is paramount. Question 13. The assessment process reveals that the internal audit team has focused exclusively on the explicit requirements of ISO 13485, 2016 clauses, without adequately evaluating how the organization's quality management system integrates the risk management principles mandated by ISO 14971 and the foundational quality management principles often derived from ISO 9001, as these relate to the expectations of regulatory bodies and end users. From a stakeholder perspective, which approach by the internal audit team would best demonstrate a comprehensive and effective evaluation of the medical device QMS? Option A. The audit team should focus solely on the documented procedures for ISO 13485-2016, assuming that if these are in place, the integration with ISO 14971 and ISO 9001 will be implicitly managed by departmental heads. Option B. The audit team should prioritize the audit of ISO 13485, 2016 requirements, as it is the primary standard for medical devices, and consider ISO 14971 and ISO 9001 as supplementary standards that are not critical for demonstrating compliance to regulatory bodies. Option C. The audit team should evaluate the QMS by assessing the integration of ISO 14971 for risk management throughout the product lifecycle and considering how ISO 9001 principles enhance the overall effectiveness and stakeholder confidence in the QMS, all within the framework of ISO 13485, 2016. Option D. The audit team should assess the QMS by examining the explicit requirements of ISO 13485, 2016, ensuring that ISO 14971 is addressed as a separate, standalone process, and considering ISO 9001 principles only where they directly overlap with ISO 13485, 2016 requirements. Correct answer is D. The audit team should assess the QMS by examining the explicit requirements of ISO 13485, 2016, ensuring that ISO 14971 is addressed as a separate, standalone process, and considering ISO 9001 principles only where they directly overlap with ISO 13485, 2016 requirements. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an internal auditor to navigate the interconnectedness of ISO 13485, 2016 with other relevant ISO standards, specifically ISO 9001 and ISO 14971, from a stakeholder perspective. The challenge lies in understanding how these standards, while distinct, contribute to the overall effectiveness and compliance of a medical device quality management system, QMS. The auditor must assess not just adherence to ISO 13485, 2016 clauses, but also how the QMS integrates risk management principles, ISO 14971, and general quality management principles, ISO 9001, to meet stakeholder expectations, including regulatory bodies, patients, and healthcare professionals. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it demonstrates a holistic understanding of the QMS and its regulatory environment. By focusing on how ISO 13485, 2016 integrates with ISO 9001 and ISO 14971, the auditor is evaluating the QMS's ability to manage risks effectively and ensure product safety and performance, which are paramount for all stakeholders. This integrated view ensures that the QMS is not merely a set of documented procedures, but a living system that proactively addresses potential issues and consistently delivers safe and effective medical devices. This aligns with the overarching goal of ISO 13485, 2016, which is to facilitate harmonized regulatory requirements for medical devices. An incorrect approach that solely focuses on ISO 13485, 2016 without considering the integration of ISO 9001 and ISO 14971 would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a limited understanding of the QMS's broader context. ISO 9001 provides foundational quality management principles that, while not mandatory for ISO 13485, 2016 certification, often underpin effective QMS implementation and can enhance stakeholder confidence. More critically, ISO 14971 is a mandatory requirement for risk management in medical devices. Ignoring its integration means the auditor is not adequately assessing the QMS's ability to identify, evaluate, and control risks associated with medical devices throughout their life cycle, a direct violation of the spirit and intent of ISO 13485, 2016, and a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Another incorrect approach would be to treat ISO 9001 and ISO 14971 as separate, independent audits rather than integrated components of the medical device QMS. This would lead to fragmented findings and a missed opportunity to assess the synergistic benefits and potential conflicts between these standards within the specific context of the organization. Ethically, this approach fails to provide a comprehensive assurance to stakeholders that the QMS is robust and risk-informed. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific regulatory requirements and applicable standards for the medical device in question. 2. Identifying all relevant stakeholders and their expectations regarding product safety, performance, and quality. 3. Analyzing the organization's QMS documentation and processes to understand how ISO 13485, 2016 is implemented. 4. Specifically evaluating the integration of ISO 14971 for risk management and considering the influence of ISO 9001 principles on the QMS. 5. Assessing the effectiveness of the QMS in meeting stakeholder needs and regulatory requirements through an integrated lens. 6. Communicating findings clearly, highlighting both compliance and areas for improvement, with a focus on the impact on product safety and stakeholder trust. Question 14. Compliance review shows that the Quality Assurance Department has a comprehensive training matrix for all personnel involved in medical device manufacturing, detailing mandatory training modules based on job roles and ISO 13485, 2016 requirements. However, during an audit, it was observed that several production line operators were not consistently following the updated work instructions for a critical assembly step, and when questioned, they expressed uncertainty about the recent changes. What is the most appropriate approach for the Quality Assurance Department to address this situation and demonstrate compliance with ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 6? 2. Regarding competence, training, and awareness. Option A. Rely on the existing training matrix and assume that the operators will eventually learn the correct procedure through on-the-job experience. Option B. Conduct a targeted retraining session for the affected operators focusing on the specific work instruction, followed by a practical competency assessment to verify understanding and correct application. Option C. Update the training matrix to include a note that all personnel are expected to be aware of updated work instructions as part of their general QMS awareness. Option D. Issue a formal warning to the operators for not following the work instructions and schedule a general QMS awareness refresher for the entire department. The correct answer is B. Conduct a targeted retraining session for the affected operators focusing on the specific work instruction, followed by a practical competency assessment to verify understanding and correct application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, where the effectiveness of training and awareness programs for human resources is questioned. The challenge lies in demonstrating that training not only occurred, but also resulted in the intended understanding and application of QMS requirements, particularly concerning ISO 13485-2016. Auditors will look beyond simple attendance records to assess the actual impact on personnel behavior and adherence to procedures. The difficulty arises from the subjective nature of awareness and the need for objective evidence to support claims of competence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on verifying the effectiveness of training by assessing whether personnel understand their roles and responsibilities within the QMS and can apply this knowledge in their daily work. This aligns with ISO 13485-2016, Clause 6. 2, which mandates that personnel performing work affecting product quality shall be competent on the basis of education, training, skills, and experience. It also requires that the effectiveness of actions taken to ensure competence be evaluated. Demonstrating this effectiveness through practical observation, competency assessments, and review of work outputs provides objective evidence that the training has achieved its intended outcome, thereby fulfilling regulatory expectations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on training attendance records. This fails to meet the ISO 13485-2016 requirement to evaluate the effectiveness of actions taken to ensure competence. Attendance does not guarantee understanding or application. This is a regulatory failure as it does not provide evidence of achieved competence. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because a procedure exists, all personnel are automatically aware of its contents and implications. Awareness is not inherent. It must be actively cultivated through training and reinforced through communication and oversight. This approach neglects the human element and the need for explicit communication and verification, leading to a potential QMS failure and a risk to product quality. A third incorrect approach would be to focus only on the initial training provided upon hiring, without considering ongoing training needs or updates to procedures and regulations. Competence and awareness are not static. They require continuous development. Failing to address this leads to a gap in the QMS, potentially resulting in noncompliance with ISO 13485-2016, Clause 6. 2, which implies a need for ongoing competence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this by adopting a risk-based perspective. Identify critical roles and processes impacting product quality. For these areas, implement robust training programs that include methods for assessing comprehension and application, such as practical exercises, quizzes, or supervisor evaluations. Regularly review training effectiveness by observing work practices and analyzing deviations or nonconformities that may be linked to a lack of competence or awareness. Document these assessments and use the findings to refine training programs. This systematic approach ensures that the QMS is not just a set of documents, but a living system where personnel are demonstrably competent and aware of their responsibilities. Question 15. The audit findings indicate that while the risk management file for Class Roman II medical device clearly identifies potential hazards and outlines corresponding risk control measures, the audit team has observed a lack of objective evidence, demonstrating that these implemented control measures have effectively reduced the identified risks to an acceptable level. Which of the following audit approaches best addresses this situation in accordance with ISO 13485-2016 requirements? Option A. Focus on verifying the implementation of the documented risk control measures in the relevant processes and accept that implementation implies effectiveness in mitigating the identified risks. Option B. Review the risk management file to confirm that risk control measures are documented and then accept the organization's assertion that these measures are effective based on their stated intent. Option C. Examine objective evidence of the implementation of the documented risk control measures and critically evaluate data and records that demonstrate the effectiveness of these measures in reducing the identified risks to an acceptable level. Option D. Recommend that the organization conduct a new risk assessment to identify additional control measures, as the current ones may not be sufficient given the lack of clear evidence of effectiveness. Correct answer is B. Review the risk management file to confirm that risk control measures are documented and then accept the organization's assertion that these measures are effective based on their stated intent. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, ensuring that risk control measures, a cornerstone of ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7, 1, 2, are not only documented but also effectively implemented and verified throughout the product lifecycle. The challenge lies in moving beyond mere procedural compliance to demonstrating tangible, evidence-based risk reduction. Auditors must discern whether the implemented measures are truly mitigating identified risks to an acceptable level, or if they are superficial, poorly executed, or not adequately verified. This requires a deep understanding of the risk management process and the ability to critically evaluate the link between risk assessment, control implementation, and verification of effectiveness. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive evaluation of the implemented risk control measures against the identified risks. This means the auditor must 1. Verify that the documented risk control measures, e.g., design changes, process controls, user instructions, have been physically implemented as intended. This requires examining objective evidence such as updated design records, manufacturing process records, training records, and labeling. 2. Assess the effectiveness of these implemented measures in reducing the identified risks. This is crucial and often the most challenging aspect. Effectiveness is demonstrated by evidence that the risk has been reduced to an acceptable level. This could include data from usability studies, post-market surveillance data, complaint trend analysis, or verification and validation testing specifically designed to confirm the mitigation of the risk. 3. Ensure that the verification of effectiveness is documented and that the results confirm the risk reduction. ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7. 1. 2. Explicitly requires verification of the effectiveness of risk control measures. This verification must be documented and demonstrate that the risks have been reduced to an acceptable level. Incorrect approaches analysis. Accepting documented procedures without verifying implementation and effectiveness is a significant regulatory failure. ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 7. 1. 2. Mandates not just the identification and documentation of risk control measures, but also their verification. An approach that focuses solely on the existence of documented risk assessments and control plans, without examining objective evidence of their implementation, and critically, their effectiveness, fails to meet the requirements of ISO 13485, 2016. This is a failure to demonstrate that risks are being actively managed and reduced. An approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or assumptions about effectiveness, without objective data or testing, is also a failure. ISO 13485, 2016 requires objective evidence. Without it, the organization cannot prove that the risk control measures are actually working. This can lead to continued exposure to unacceptable risks, potentially impacting patient safety and leading to regulatory noncompliance. An approach that only verifies the implementation of a control measure, but not its effectiveness in mitigating the specific risk it was intended to address, is incomplete. The standard requires verification of effectiveness, meaning confirmation that the risk has been reduced. Simply implementing a control does not guarantee it achieves the desired risk reduction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, evidence-based approach. When auditing risk control measures, the process should be 1. Understand the identified risks and the intended control measures from the risk management file. 2. Seek objective evidence of the implementation of these control measures in the relevant processes, design, manufacturing, labeling, etc. 3. Critically evaluate the evidence demonstrating the effectiveness of these implemented measures in reducing the identified risks to an acceptable level. This often involves reviewing verification and validation data, post-market data, and performance metrics. 4. Document findings clearly, highlighting any gaps in implementation or evidence of effectiveness. Question 16. The performance metrics show a consistent trend of minor nonconformities related to documentation control and a slight increase in customer complaints regarding product labeling. Yet the last management review meeting minutes indicate that the QMS is suitable, adequate, and effective. As an internal auditor, which of the following approaches would best ensure compliance with ISO 13485, 2016 requirements for management review inputs and outputs? Option A. Review the documented procedure for management review and verify that all required inputs, as specified in ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 5, 6, 2 were presented and discussed, and that the outputs, as per Clause 5, 6, 3, clearly defined actions, responsibilities, and timelines for addressing identified issues, including the trends in nonconformities and customer complaints. Option B. Assess whether the management review meeting agenda included a general discussion on the overall performance of the QMS, without specific focus on the detailed inputs and outputs. Option C. Confirm that management review meetings have been held at the planned intervals specified in the organization's QMS documentation. Option D. Examine the management review minutes to ensure they are signed and dated by the appropriate management personnel. Correct answer is A. Review the documented procedure for management review and verify that all required inputs, as specified in ISO 13485, 2016 Clause 5, 6, 2, were presented and discussed, and that the outputs as per Clause 5, 6, 3, clearly defined actions, responsibilities, and timelines for addressing identified issues, including the trends in nonconformities and customer complaints. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge in medical device quality management systems, QMS, where the effectiveness of management review is questioned due to a perceived disconnect between the review process and actual operational improvements. The challenge lies in ensuring that management review, as mandated by ISO 13485, 2016, is not merely a perfunctory exercise, but a strategic tool that drives tangible improvements in the QMS and product safety. The auditor must discern whether the documented inputs and outputs are sufficient and appropriately utilized to fulfill the requirements of the standard and contribute to the organization's quality objectives. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on verifying that the management review process, as documented and executed, aligns with the requirements of ISO 13485, 2016, specifically Clause 5, 6, 1 management review and 5, 6, 2 management review input and 5, 6, 3 management review output. This involves assessing whether all mandated inputs, e.g., results of audits, feedback, process performance, status of corrective and preventive action, changes affecting the QMS, recommendations for improvement, were considered, and whether the outputs, e.g., decisions and actions related to QMS improvement, product improvement, resource needs, were clearly defined, documented, and subsequently implemented and monitored. This approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the core purpose of management review: to ensure the continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the QMS, and to drive improvements. It demonstrates a thorough understanding of the standard's intent and the auditor's responsibility to verify compliance and effectiveness. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that focuses solely on the frequency of management reviews without evaluating the quality or completeness of the inputs and outputs fails to meet the standard's intent. ISO 13485, 2016 requires reviews to be conducted at planned intervals, but the effectiveness is determined by the substance of the review, not just its occurrence. This approach risks overlooking critical issues that were not adequately presented or addressed during the review, leading to potential non-compliance and a false sense of security regarding QMS effectiveness. An approach that prioritizes the documentation of management review minutes over the actual implementation and follow-up of decisions made during the review is also flawed. While detailed minutes are important, the true value of management review lies in the actions taken and their impact on the QMS. Focusing only on the documentation without verifying the subsequent actions and their effectiveness means the review is not fulfilling its purpose of driving improvement and ensuring suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. This can lead to a QMS that appears compliant on paper but is ineffective in practice, posing risks to product quality and patient safety. An approach that assumes that if a management review meeting occurred, the QMS is automatically effective, without scrutinizing the specific inputs and outputs, is a significant failure. This overlooks the critical requirement to assess the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the QMS. The standard mandates specific inputs to inform the review and specific outputs that must be acted upon. Ignoring these detailed requirements means the auditor is not performing a comprehensive assessment, potentially missing systemic issues that could impact product safety and regulatory compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this scenario by first understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485-2016 regarding management, review inputs and outputs. They should then examine the organization's documented procedures for management review and compare them against the standard. The next step is to audit the actual execution of management reviews, looking for evidence that all required inputs were considered and that the outputs were clearly documented, assigned, and followed up on. This involves reviewing meeting minutes, action item logs, and evidence of implemented actions and their effectiveness. Professionals should maintain an objective stance, focusing on evidence-based conclusions rather than assumptions. When evaluating the effectiveness of the QMS, they must consider the entire management review process, from input to output and subsequent action, to ensure it is a robust mechanism for continuous improvement and regulatory compliance. Question 17. Strategic planning requires a thorough understanding of how organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities are defined and implemented to ensure the effectiveness of the medical device quality management system. During an internal audit of a medical device manufacturer, adhering to ISO 13485-2016, which audit approach would best assess the risk associated with the clarity and assignment of these elements? Option A. Evaluate the effectiveness of risk management processes by examining how clearly defined roles and authorities contribute to the identification, assessment, and mitigation of risks throughout the product lifecycle. Option B. Confirm the existence of an organizational chart and ensure that all management positions are filled, without delving into the specifics of individual responsibilities or decision-making authority. Option C. Assume that all responsibilities are implicitly understood by experienced personnel and focus the audit on other QMS areas. Option D. Verify that all employees have up-to-date job descriptions that accurately reflect their current duties, regardless of their impact on risk management. Correct answer is A. Evaluate the effectiveness of risk management processes by examining how clearly defined roles and authorities contribute to the identification, assessment, and mitigation of risks throughout the product lifecycle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an internal auditor to assess the effectiveness of defined organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities within a medical device quality management system, QMS, under ISO 13485-2016, specifically through the lens of risk assessment. The challenge lies in moving beyond a simple checklist verification of documented roles to evaluating the practical implementation and the potential impact of unclear or unassigned responsibilities on product safety and regulatory compliance. The auditor must consider how potential gaps in authority or responsibility could lead to risks that are not adequately identified, assessed, or mitigated, which is a core tenet of ISO 13485. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the risk-based approach mandated by ISO 13485-2016. Clause 4. 1. General requirements and Clause 7. 1. Planning of product realization implicitly require the organization to identify and manage risks associated with its processes, including those related to personnel and their defined roles. By focusing on how the clarity and assignment of roles, responsibilities, and authorities impact risk management activities, e.g., risk assessment, risk control, post-market surveillance, the auditor is evaluating the QMS's ability to prevent nonconformities and ensure product safety. This approach demonstrates a proactive and effective audit methodology that adds value by identifying potential systemic weaknesses before they manifest as significant issues. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that focuses solely on verifying the existence of documented job descriptions without assessing their practical application or their link to risk management activities, fails to meet the spirit and intent of ISO 13485. This is a regulatory failure because it overlooks the requirement for effective risk management, Clause 7. 1. And the need for the QMS to be effective in achieving its objectives, including product safety. It is an ethical failure, as it provides a false sense of assurance regarding the QMS's robustness. An approach that prioritizes identifying minor documentation discrepancies in organizational charts over assessing the impact of unclear responsibilities on critical risk management processes is also flawed. This represents a regulatory failure by misapplying audit focus, potentially missing significant risks related to decision-making authority or accountability for risk mitigation activities. It is an ethical failure because it prioritizes superficial compliance over substantive assurance of product safety. An approach that assumes all responsibilities are implicitly understood and therefore does not require explicit definition or verification of authority for critical risk-related activities is a significant regulatory failure. ISO 13485, 2016, particularly in clauses related to management responsibility, Clause 5. 5.1 and process control necessitates clear assignment of authority and responsibility to ensure effective QMS operation and risk management. This assumption can lead to gaps in accountability, delayed decision-making during critical events, and ultimately compromised product safety, which is a direct contravention of the standard's objectives. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based audit approach. This involves understanding the organization's processes, identifying potential failure modes, and assessing the likelihood and impact of those failures. When auditing organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities, the auditor should ask, how could a lack of clarity or defined authority in this role lead to a risk that impacts product safety or regulatory compliance? This leads to a deeper analysis of the QMS's effectiveness, rather than just its documented existence. The auditor should then link their findings to specific ISO 13485 clauses and the organization's risk management procedures. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates that leadership commitment to process optimization within the medical device QMS is a critical factor for sustained compliance and improvement. As an internal auditor for a medical device manufacturer, adhering to ISO 13485-2016, which of the following approaches would most effectively demonstrate the auditor's assessment of leadership's commitment to process optimization? Option A. Assessing the clarity and accessibility of the documented quality policy and objectives, ensuring they are prominently displayed throughout the facility. Option B. Examining the frequency and attendance records of management review meetings, noting any discussions related to process efficiency. Option C. Evaluating the personal engagement and perceived enthusiasm of top management during quality-related discussions and meetings. Option D. Reviewing documented evidence of leadership's participation in and oversight of process improvement projects, including the allocation of resources and the review of their outcomes against defined objectives. The correct answer is D. Reviewing documented evidence of leadership's participation in and oversight of process improvement projects, including the allocation of resources and the review of their outcomes against defined objectives. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an internal auditor to assess the effectiveness of leadership's commitment to the quality management system, QMS, within the context of ISO 13485-2016, specifically focusing on process optimization. The challenge lies in moving beyond superficial evidence to evaluate the tangible impact of leadership's actions on the QMS's performance and its ability to drive improvements, rather than just its existence. Auditors must discern genuine commitment from mere compliance activities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with the intent of ISO 13485-2016, particularly Clause 5, Management Responsibility, and Clause 7. 1. Planning of product realization. It focuses on observable outcomes and the integration of leadership's commitment into the actual processes of the organization. By evaluating how leadership actively participates in and drives process optimization initiatives, the auditor can ascertain if their commitment is translating into tangible improvements in product quality, regulatory compliance, and overall QMS effectiveness. This approach demonstrates a deep understanding of how leadership's role is foundational to a robust QMS and its continuous improvement, which is a core tenet of ISO 13485. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that solely reviews documented management review minutes without assessing the implementation of decisions or the impact of those decisions on process optimization, fails to demonstrate leadership commitment beyond a procedural requirement. This is a regulatory failure as it overlooks the effectiveness of the QMS, which is a key objective of management review under ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 5. 6. It also represents an ethical failure by presenting a superficial assessment as thorough, an approach that focuses exclusively on the availability of a quality policy and objectives, without verifying their communication, understanding, and integration into daily operations and process improvement efforts is insufficient. ISO 13485, 2016, Clause 5. 1. Requires leadership to establish, implement, and maintain the quality policy and objectives, and ensure they are understood throughout the organization. Simply having them documented does not equate to effective leadership commitment to process optimization. This is a regulatory failure as it misses the practical application of leadership's role, an approach that prioritizes the auditor's personal opinion on the leadership team's demeanor during meetings, rather than objective evidence of their actions, and their impact on QMS processes is unprofessional and subjective. ISO 13485, 2016 requires objective evidence for audit findings. Relying on subjective impressions is a significant ethical failure and a regulatory failure as it deviates from the principles of evidence-based auditing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that emphasizes evidence-based evaluation of leadership's impact on the QMS. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485, 2016 related to management responsibility and process improvement. 2. Identifying key performance indicators and process metrics that leadership is expected to influence. 3. Seeking objective evidence of leadership's involvement in strategic decisions, resource allocation for improvement initiatives, and the monitoring of their effectiveness. 4. Correlating leadership actions with observable improvements in QMS processes and product realization. 5. Maintaining objectivity and avoiding reliance on subjective impressions or mere documentation review. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal that a critical process validation record for a Class Roman II medical device lacks the required signatures from both the process engineer and the quality assurance representative, as stipulated in the organization's documented procedures aligned with ISO 13485-2016. What is the most appropriate internal audit response to this finding? Option A. Update the documented procedure to remove the requirement for dual signatures to streamline the validation process. Option B. Immediately revalidate the entire process to ensure all documentation is complete and compliant with ISO 13485-2016. Option C. Document the missing signatures as a minor observation and instruct the process engineer to sign the record at their earliest convenience. Option D. Initiate a formal nonconformity investigation to determine the root cause of the missing signatures, assess the impact on the validation's integrity and product safety, and implement appropriate corrective and preventive actions. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal nonconformity investigation to determine the root cause of the missing signatures, assess the impact on the validation's integrity and product safety, and implement appropriate corrective and preventive actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in medical device quality management systems, where an internal audit identifies a deviation from established procedures. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the impact of this deviation on product safety and regulatory compliance, particularly in the context of ISO 13485, 2016, which emphasizes a risk-based approach and the need for robust documentation. The auditor must not only identify the nonconformity, but also determine its root cause and the appropriate corrective actions, ensuring that the QMS remains effective and compliant with the standard. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to understand the scope and impact of the deviation. This includes identifying the specific clause, S, of ISO 13485-2016 that have been affected, determining the root cause of the deviation, and assessing its potential impact on product safety and performance. Based on this assessment, appropriate corrective and preventive actions, COPPA, must be implemented and verified for effectiveness. This aligns with the risk-based approach mandated by ISO 13485-2016 and the standard's emphasis on continuous improvement and the maintenance of an effective QMS. The process ensures that the QMS remains compliant and that potential risks to patients and users are mitigated. And correct approach is analysis, an approach that focuses solely on documenting the deviation without investigating its root cause or impact, fails to address the underlying issues and prevent recurrence, violating the spirit of ISO 13485-2016 corrective action requirements. This is a superficial response that does not contribute to the effectiveness of the QMS, an approach that immediately implements drastic, unverified changes to procedures without understanding the root cause or impact risks, introducing new nonconformities, or disrupting the established QMS. This is a reactive and potentially harmful approach that does not adhere to the systematic, risk-based problem-solving expected under ISO 13485-2016. An approach that dismisses the deviation as minor without a documented risk assessment or impact analysis is a significant regulatory failure. ISO 13485-2016 requires a systematic evaluation of all nonconformities, and deeming something minor without proper justification can lead to overlooked risks that could compromise product safety and regulatory compliance. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and adherence to the standards requirements for managing nonconformities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by following a structured problem-solving methodology. This involves 1. Clearly defining the nonconformity. 2. Investigating the root cause using appropriate tools, e.g., 5 Whys fishbone diagram. 3. Assessing the impact on product safety, performance, and regulatory compliance, considering the risk management principles outlined in ISO 14971. Though not explicitly part of ISO 13485, it's a critical companion standard for medical devices. 4. Developing and implementing effective CAPA. 5. Verifying the effectiveness of the CAPA. 6. Documenting the entire process thoroughly. This systematic approach ensures that deviations are addressed effectively, the QMS is strengthened, and regulatory requirements are met. Question 20. Assessment of an internal auditor's approach to evaluating the adequacy of work environment controls for a medical device manufacturer, as required by ISO 13485-2016, when the auditor observes a generally clean and organized production area. Which of the following approaches best demonstrates adherence to the standard and professional auditing practice? Option A. Viewing documented procedures for work environment control, observing specific environmental monitoring activities, e.g., temperature, humidity checks, examining records of these activities, and verifying the effectiveness of actions taken in response to any recorded deviations. Option B. Focusing solely on the final product's conformity to specifications, assuming that any environmental issues would have resulted in non-conforming products. Option C. Conducting a brief visual inspection of the production floor to confirm general cleanliness and orderliness, without delving into specific environmental parameters or documented procedures. Option D. Accepting management's verbal assurance that the work environment is adequately controlled, given the visible tidiness of the production area. The correct answer is A. Reviewing documented procedures for work environment control, observing specific environmental monitoring activities, e.g., temperature, humidity checks, examining records of these activities, and verifying the effectiveness of actions taken in response to any recorded deviations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an internal auditor to balance the need for objective quality assurance with the practical realities of a manufacturing environment. The auditor must assess whether the work environment, a factor directly impacting product quality and safety, is adequately controlled and monitored according to ISO 13485-2016 requirements. Failure to do so could lead to non-conforming products, patient harm, and regulatory non-compliance. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of detail and evidence required to confirm compliance without overstepping into operational management. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves the auditor systematically reviewing documented procedures for work environment control, verifying their implementation through observation and objective evidence, and assessing the effectiveness of any corrective actions taken. This aligns directly with ISO 13485-2016, Clause 6. 4. Work environment, which mandates that the organization must determine and maintain suitable conditions necessary for the prevention of adverse effects on product quality. The auditor's role is to provide assurance that the organization has established and is following these controls, which includes verifying that environmental monitoring is performed, records are maintained, and any deviations are addressed. This approach ensures a comprehensive and evidence-based assessment of compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that relies solely on management assurances without seeking objective evidence is professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the auditor's responsibility to provide independent verification. It also violates the principles of ISO 13485/2016, which requires objective evidence for all audit findings. An approach that focuses only on the final product's conformity without considering the work environment's influence is also flawed. Final product testing is crucial. It does not address the root causes of potential quality issues that may stem from inadequate environmental controls. ISO 13485/2016 emphasizes a process-based approach, where controls throughout the manufacturing process, including the work environment, are critical. An approach that assumes a clean and orderly facility automatically implies adequate environmental controls is a superficial assessment. While good housekeeping is a component, it does not encompass all aspects of work environment control, such as temperature, humidity, contamination prevention, or specific requirements for sterile environments if applicable. The auditor must look for specific controls and monitoring relevant to the medical device's risk class and intended use. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific requirements of ISO 13485/2016 related to the audit area. This involves identifying the relevant clauses and subclauses. Next, the auditor should plan the audit activities, determining what evidence is needed to assess compliance. This includes reviewing documented procedures, interviewing personnel, and conducting direct observations. The auditor must then gather and evaluate objective evidence, comparing it against the established requirements. Finally, the auditor should document findings, including any nonconformities, and communicate them clearly to management, recommending appropriate corrective actions. This systematic process ensures thoroughness, objectivity, and adherence to regulatory standards.